Page 1. In the beginning. The ultimate objective of this information being revealed to you, is a pursuit of happiness. The criteria by which you could test your progress, is happiness. If, through development in this lifetime, you feel that you become happier, know that you're on the right path. However, as you'll see later, the more developed or intellectual you become, the more negative there is at work against you. In the foundation of yourself there has to be a philosophy by which you control your actions. Philosophy is born out of knowledge you receive through information you obtain. Without your own philosophy you become an easy target for any kind of influence through temptation. On what can you base your decisions? If you can get away with it, whatever it may be, you will. But isn't it true to say that somewhere inside of us there is a little device that goes off, when, even in our thoughts, we are contemplating negative action? We say, I will not be able to live with myself. On the other hand there are those who are totally consumed by negative, and on a surface they seem to be striving on negative actions. Those, however, thank God, are in great minority. What I'm going to attempt is to define, in a very simple way of course, philosophy, or maybe I should say a belief, that is shared by all New Age thinkers. I don't have a statistical data, but it would be fair to say that today a number of people sharing this belief is in many millions. This great energy that we call God, billions of Earth years ago, has decided to undergo a development, in some unfathomable way become fuller, greater, more. By individuating itself, this is where we came into an existence as individual entities, souls or spirits, whichever term you choose to use. Our purpose was, and is, to go through this experience of time, space and matter to learn lessons which could not be learned in any other way, even by God, only to reunite at the end. So the ultimate destiny of each and every soul is to return to the source. And then, in some way, this beautiful, great, loving energy, that we call God, will become more perfect, more infinite, more one. But even though, in this material world of ours, we are perceived as separate entities, in ways the science cannot yet measure, we are all interlinked, interconnected. Some feel connections more than others, as in a case of loved ones, you often feel pain, when they're in pain, and joy, when they are happy. The challenge of every entity is to come to an inner realization of oneness in God, and, by perfectly fulfilling the law, to become absorbed back, into oneness. Through separation from the source, or God, some entities became disoriented and lost, absorbed into their own I, but no one is lost forever. And no matter how far astray we might find ourselves to be, we are still connected. Page 2. Without negative, there would be no development, or it wouldn't be as dramatic, so the negative was, in a grand plan. Now, I would like to make myself very clear, I am not here to preach, I am just like you, it is not my intention to write an autobiography, let me just tell you, that I do, no pain. From being loved and popular, I became despised and lonely, and it has been many years, since the last time I remember myself being happy. The only way for me, was to look for answers to grand questions, the reason for my being here, the reasons for my suffering. If I only knew then, what I know now, a lot of losses could have been avoided. Now, tell me something, wouldn't you be interested, to find out, that there is an intelligent force at work, especially designed to lead you astray, to constantly drive you into the dead ends, a force, that is solely responsible for all your sufferings and pain, be it mental or physical. A force that is responsible for all your wrongdoings. Wouldn't you be surprised, to say the least, to find out, that this force is a living, breathing, thinking, eating organism, that lives inside each and every one of us? Wouldn't you be even more astounded to find out that this creature could be exorcised out of your body, never to invade it again? Well, if the answer is yes, then follow me, but be prepared, you will be experiencing certain symptoms. Your body will be responding, your eyes might, All of a sudden, shut close. Your left arm might begin to feel numb and you will feel uncomfortable. Most common response is a movement inside your body, be it stomach, or chest, or even your leg, but you will feel it. No, this is not a horror story, or one man's delusion, or a hallucination, neither is it a science fiction. It is a story about me and you, and what we're really made of, so, embrace yourself, for the ride of your life. Yes, I am talking about that, which used to be recognized by church since the beginning of time. It had many different names, devil was among one of them. I chose negative entity, as a more appropriate term. We have evolved from the time, when anything not understood was either forbidden, feared or just ignored. In simple words, we, thank God, do not burn witches anymore. But, unfortunately, we haven't evolved far enough, yet, to understand that the way to happiness is not through technological progress, for which we are so proud and at the same time so bewildered. No, it is not external that makes us happy, it is internal, and internal is synonymous with spiritual. In this age of remarkable technological progress, we seem to make our own nature, our spiritual nature, a secondary issue at best, and it contributes directly to so much confusion, unhappiness, crime and misery that we live in. My plan is not to come up with all kinds of beautiful conclusions, meaningful statements, or useless cliché. My plan is to create a practical solution to that nightmare, that some of us are faced with in life, at one point or another, and some of us are facing it right now. Their nightmare is ultimate self-destruction, namely, drug addiction. Those people are trapped in a vicious cycle. And however derogatory they seem to be to a normal human being, they are human in every way you are. As a matter of fact, they are a direct result of our civilization being so ignorant in the most important part of human nature, spiritual part. Page 3. Our civilization has put very little emphasis on understanding of what we are. If the development would have gone into spirituality, with the same drive, as it went into technology, planet Earth would have been a lot happier place to live on. I truly think that, by now, we all realize that no comfort in the world will ever replace inner comfort. And the only way to obtain that inner comfort is through spiritual development. This is where you will begin to understand who you really are and what is your purpose. My hope is to bring you closer to that understanding. In the beginning it's always dark, but stay with me, you will be amazed, as you will begin to realize what a complex and wonderful creatures we all are. It may even sound to you as something out of a science fiction, but if you are persistent enough, a picture soon will begin to appear, and you will understand that hell is not endless. On the contrary, what's eternal is love and happiness. But it may take some time before you reach this destination. Let me tell you just this much. Not only it will worth your while, but it is the only way. So good luck, and let's begin massaging your brain. There are many books on the subject of occult study, and I'm not here to write a summary or my own interpretation of spiritual understanding. My idea is not to share with you my philosophy and my understanding on the workings of the universe. I am just trying to feel the ground with you, to see if we are more or less on the same level. Then I can go on to the heart of the reason, and if you don't understand what I'm talking about, then you're just wasting your time. You don't begin with trigonometry in the first grade. My mission is not to create a literally masterpiece. What I wish to share is that, through accumulation of teachings experience, that I had, if, to someone would have been not more than a terrifying hallucination, to me, made perfect sense. And, if science is willing to be with me on it for a while, my experience could be reproduced in laboratory conditions. It could be documented, tested, looked at from any angle, and then conclusions could be drawn. Results will be astounding, I can promise you that much. I have no means to do those laboratory tests by myself. Whatever I am saying, I want you to take literally and not as a metaphor. For a brief moment of you reading this, I want you to go out on a limb and believe it. It's not easy for me to describe, and there will be no allegories. What you are reading is exactly as it happened. Being born in 1950 up until I reached my 35th birthday, I went through more or less everything in a book: love, happiness, loss, disappointment, marriage, divorce, hate, and so on and so forth. I was in a sense a happy-go-lucky guy, but all that changed. After my divorce I grew more and more unhappy, lost. This is where cocaine became more and more frequent. I was sniffing it and freebasing it. Then I stopped sniffing it altogether, considering it to be a waste. I used to call freebase an adult-strength painkiller, which, what it, exactly, was for me. Any time pain would become unbearable, I mean of course mental pain, freebase would be a temporary solution. Long-term solutions were my books. I was drowning myself in books on spiritual development. Page 4. Anything that would offer any kind of an answer to a never-ending question of why am I here? Why do I have to suffer? So it was this way for about 5 years. More books, more coke, etc., etc. Solutions, if anything, seemed further and further away. Don't get me wrong, books were always my joy, and slowly the big picture began to form. Realization of my special place in the universe and reason for being were coming closer and closer to my logical comprehension. But the funniest thing, pain, my mental pain, never went away. Everything would make perfect sense to the very depths of my being. All so-called New Age literature, the essence of it, triggered something inside of me that said it's the only right explanation, but the pain would still be there. So, I understood that obtaining information is fine. It broadens your horizon, it makes you see the invisible reality, it even explains your being, but one thing it does not do, it does not alleviate your pain, nor does it make life any easier. My cocktail of books and cocaine continued, and, it seemed, there was no solution anywhere near. I had a friend, friend. She was a little, shall we say, strange. The best way to describe someone like her would be to say that she was most of the time on the other side. You see, I enjoy reading New Age literature, practicing meditation, talking to psychics, sharing my viewpoints with other people who are in search of truth, but I live in a material world with its laws and responsibilities. There are some people, however, who spend most of the time in the world of spirit, rather than where they're supposed to be, and this kind I don't particularly enjoy. They seem to be avoiding, or trying to escape everyday living by hiding behind Ouija boards, tarot cards, or some other way of self-delusion with very little regard for new information. To put it simply, there are psychics and there are psychotics. So, my lady friend belonged to a rather later group, which made our relationship boring, to say the least. Be it as it may, every now and then I would come over to her place, most of the time because I had no other place to go. We would play with Ouija board and she would lay her cards for me. She was good at it, always telling me what I wanted to hear. Eventually, mostly because of boredom, we began experimenting with cocaine together, basically just playing with it, nothing serious. Neither of us had a lot of money, and in a sense it was a blessing. In one of those evenings, after inhaling about a gram of this cooked substance, I, all of a sudden, felt some kind of strange movement on the back of my right shoulder blade. I asked my friend if she could see anything there, and, to my amazement, she said yes. She could see what seemed to be a swelling of some sort, and, under closer examination, she told me, and I felt it myself, that it moves. Most interestingly, it moved in some strange way. When her hand would come closer to my skin, but not exactly touch it, the swellings, there was 2 of them, followed the direction the hand would move. My friend, being a person that likes to exaggerate things to its ultimate, concluded that they are some kind of animals that live under my skin, and her hand was attracting them as a magnet. Which, from the look of it, was exactly how it looked. She would bring her hand closer to my skin and the swelling would appear to become bigger. I could not see it, but that's what it felt like. The swellings, which were easily visible, would move to match the movement of her hand, as though they really were some kind of underskin snakes. They would follow her hand's every move. The closer her hand would get to the surface of my skin, they would become bigger and easier to see. Page 5. I was not scared at all, knowing that there must be some kind of a logical explanation, a normal explanation. In the beginning I blamed it all on cocaine, thinking that, I've been had and somehow bad stuff is responsible for all this commotion. You hear all kinds of horror stories of this sort, without really paying too much attention to what they're saying about side effects. So I called my supplier, told him exactly what was going on. He came over, looked at my shoulder blade and, thinking that I'm losing my mind, told me to never call him again and left. Not that I blame him. My diagnosis was related to the lymph, adrenaline gland and body fluids. I convinced myself that all those movements are a direct response of glands to a highly potent substance being introduced into my body. I liked my argument, it made sense to me and wanted to hear no more about those animals. The whole concept seemed ridiculous and, as I then thought, could only be formed in the mind of a delusional person. Before this incident, she told me a few times that, she, being as sensitive as she claimed, could feel that, in her own words, there is an animal inside of me and, in no uncertain terms, she meant it literally, physically. She even mentioned a few times that, this animal has its own distinctive smell. Obviously, I ignored it as absurd. Nevertheless, our experiments continued. My way of life began to take a toll on my nerves. Nothing was meaningful to me anymore. My moods wildly swung from depression to almost suicidal with occasional blocks of my own interpretation of cocktail Molotov, which consisted of booze, cocaine and sleeping medication, halcyon pills. I don't think I have to go into depths, describing what my mind was beginning to look like. I was on the road of no return. At this time I would like to remind you, that, this biological computer of mine, my brain, has been filled with a lot of information, which, up until now, even though had made a lot of sense and answered all kinds of questions, but hasn't had, what you might call, a practical application. And I had doubts that it ever will. I mean, how are you supposed to bring two different dimensions together and feel what is happening, without, actually, living through this experience, with every fiber of your body? Of course, when you are reading a good book, that steers you in the right direction, it makes you feel better, it makes you better and, obviously, you feel the transformation that is taking place within your system. I mean, yes, through mental you become better or worse in physical. So, of course, psychosomatic is at work and spiritual dimension, which science cannot measure yet, is affecting three-dimensional reality. And the way, in which it is affecting, is so subliminal, so gentle, that it escapes any kind of substance and subsequently detection. The events that followed were so dramatic that, they became a turning point in my life. Now, looking back, even though the road was most difficult, as you will see for yourself, I have no regrets. If I will prove to myself to be as determined, as the circumstances required, and this information will finally reach the right audience, results will be well worth my struggle. Page 6. Now, let's go back to the time, when my supplier declared me insane. A few days have passed since that incident. I came back to my, more or less normal, state of mind. Experience was, somehow, erased from my memory. Sure, I remembered everything, but it was put aside, and not to be disturbed. Every time subject of animal inside of me would be mentioned, it would only irritate me. I did not want to hear any more of this nonsense. Be it as it may, my options were limited and my lady friend was persistent enough, and so I gave in to her decision to expose my animal. The plan was to get as much cocaine as we could, But there would be rules: no food, no water, no booze. Nothing, only cocaine and, as crazy as it sounds, garlic, for as long as I could take it. After short deliberation I, myself being somewhat curious, had decided to go for it all the way. I figured, my life cannot get any worse, anyway, why not give it a try? She was supposed to be my assistant. Conditions were to be as close to laboratory as possible. We also had a tape recorder to make sure that notes would be taken, and of course my assistant to be absolutely straight throughout an experiment, to which she did not object at all. She was determined to prove to me that she was right. And so he began. I believe, we had no more than, about 7, maybe 8 grams of this substance, and I thought, it would be enough to prove the point. In the beginning I was, somewhat understandably, impatient. So the first hit went as usual. That marvelous sensation, when anesthesia blocks your pain. Negative feelings no longer present, and then, bang! Off goes everything unnecessary. First, second, third, they all have the same effect on you, but, slowly, you're beginning to become more and more tolerant. On about 10th or 11th time, you are beginning to become more and more in control. Bang slowly disappears, and this was precisely when experiment began. You see, after so many hits, the level of tolerance is so strong that, try it as you may, you don't get as high as you used to, and this is when strange things are beginning to happen. Now, even though it might not be exactly appropriate, from a professional writer's point of view, to go back at this time, but I'm not a professional writer, and the reason behind that little timeout is, that, I would like to explain something to you. It has been extremely difficult for me, to write this. First, I'm not enjoying, to put it mildly, reliving that experience of some 20 years ago. In my heart it could be compared to memories of someone who was raped, robbed, or violated in some other gruesome manner. The only difference is, from an unenlightened point of view, that, I was doing it to myself, by myself. Nevertheless, for a very long time I treated those memories in, I believe, the same manner they are treated by victims of violent crimes, namely blocked, if possible, if not, then just ignored and put away, far away. Secondly, I'm not enjoying revealing myself to the whole world in all the graphic details. Being brought up in an old-fashioned environment, it is extremely embarrassing, almost to the point of physical pain. The only reason I'm doing it, is, because it is necessary. And it should only be considered as an act of sacrifice on my part for the good that it may bring. I would like to emphasize that I am not a professional writer, and this is not being written for the purpose of entertainment. So the manner in which I will continue, is more of a somewhat technical than artistic kind. Page 7. Now, let's go back to the devil's game. Those of you, who had the, so-called, pleasure in experimenting with cocaine, will know immediately, when I say, strange things are beginning to happen. All of them could be described in one word: paranoia. What I will attempt to do, is to put them all into perspective, one by one, symptom by symptom, see if you can identify any, or all of them. It started, about, 4 hours into the experiment. In my case it is the usual time for occurrence to begin. Slowly you begin hearing things that are not there. In the beginning it is subliminal, so, being in a state of, somewhat, altered reality, you automatically contribute that phenomenon to a slight hallucination. After all, the information you have received in your life through books, movies and media has shaped your beliefs, and of course, for better or worse, you drew your own conclusions, which go deeper than your consciousness. To all of us, cocaine, synonymous with negative mental instability, depression, craziness, hallucinations, all of that was mentioned to us in connection with drug abuse. Following your instincts, you ignore it, for as long as you can. For as long as it does not interfere or spoil your mood. You just brush it aside as minor inconvenience. In my situation, it was however a little different. My original plan was not to alter my mood, but to get to the bottom of it, so another hour passed. Now you remember no booze, food or water. You see, in the beginning you can't even think of food, and booze you only need to bring you down, so you could re-experience high. Now, because of my restrictions, first signs of this strange phenomenon appear to be showing in a more forceful manner. Different people experience the same general pattern with this variation. You see and hear things that are only related to you and the ones you are most afraid of. So, for instance, if you're a criminal you get the feeling that police is watching your house and you begin to see them everywhere. If you are a jealous husband or boyfriend, you become suspicious of your spouse and you will start looking for intruders, with whom he or she is secretly involved. If you live with your parents, you hear them coming to your room and even knocking on your door. The main theme of all users is, somebody is watching. You get distinct impression that, whatever it is you're most afraid of, is out to get you, and the more cocaine you introduce into your system the stronger is the feeling of panic. So, you say to yourself, no, it just cannot be, and you do another hit. Panic is increased, but, at the same time, it is somewhat dulled off by anesthetic. You say to yourself, it's alright, I can take it, whatever it may be. You begin to hide in a closet, in a washroom, anywhere, but the more you hide, the more they follow you. In your parking lot, you could distinctly see, from your window, that in most cars there are cops, with binoculars. You suspect everyone in conspiracy against you. Page 8. Everyone is out to harm you. You watch your neighbors from across the corridor monitoring your every move. You can see them sneaking from under your door. You are looking at them through that little hole in your door, and just as you come close to it, they vanish, but you know. They're just behind your door, hiding from you, just laying there in the hallway, on a carpet. So that you could not see them. Then you get smart. You put scotch tape everywhere there is a hole. That's it, you've outsmarted them. They cannot see you anymore. Feeling, more or less, safe from CIA, FBI, KGB, RCMP and all the other bad guys, you take another hit and, my God, now you're really in trouble. They are coming through the balcony. So what, you're living on the 12th floor, there are always fire trucks with their long ladders or soundless helicopters or some other form of surveillance techniques, like cameras in your showers, or laser beams, from one corner of your living room to another, all over. But in a very logical manner, not just in chaos. No, they don't want you to know that they know. After all, what's for a Pentagon to install a few $1 million worth of surveillance equipment into every crack of your house? Hell, they want to know, they are curious, and they are serious about it. Hilarious, isn't it? I can go on and on. The stories that I heard are prime material for stand-up comedians, but, mind you, it is hilarious only the morning after a good 12-hour night's sleep. When you are in the middle of the Star Wars, things are anything but funny. And the only limitation to this incredible science fiction is your own imagination. So, I wouldn't really recommend Freebase to a Steven Spielberg. In my particular case, aside from occasional shadows and certain special effects with lights, every time I would light up a match, I would distinctly hear my mother knocking on the door and saying, "Open the door, it's me, your mother." I would, of course, put out the match, come to the door, see that there is nobody there, come back, and the episode would repeat itself exactly. After a few of this and, being somewhat experienced with this phenomenon, I successfully ignored it. I should mention, at this time, that, no matter how experienced you are, even though, in the back of your mind you are absolutely sure that, whatever is taking place, is nothing more than hallucination. After all, you've checked out everything a million times. You still cannot resist that inner temptation to check again, basically, because what you see and hear is 100% real, to you. In any case, there were many more, who knocked on my door, followed me around and so on and so forth. It continued approximately for another 10 to 12 hours. That was the first time that I went this far. After all, the decision was to take this experiment to its limits, and there was no going back at this point. My lady friend slept through that night and nothing out of the ordinary took place. I, however, was obviously a sight to see. After all, it's been about 16 hours into an experiment. 16 hours of no water, no sleep, and, believe me, I was beginning to get hungry by now. I went through, maybe 2 to 3 grams. To repeat myself again, the reason for doing what I was doing was only to test my friend's theory and to prove or disprove it. So, the part of enjoyment was completely taken out, and there were, as you will see now, absolutely nothing to enjoy. Page 9. I will try to describe in detail, exactly, how the process was performed. I had to take the full amount of smoke in. It goes for approximately 20 to 30 seconds. Once it's all in, I would stick 2 full heads of garlic up my nose. 1 in each nostril, and 2 or 3 heads of garlic down my throat and try to swallow it. So, now, if you recreate this picture in your head, you'll see how ridiculous I looked. Moreover, you, no doubt, will appreciate the joy I had in doing this. Nevertheless, an experiment is an experiment, and I was not going to give it up, especially that I presumed it will be over soon enough. However, I presumed wrong. What I was about to experience will be so miraculous that it will change the course of my life forever. Throughout your life you read all kinds of books, watch different movies, listen to news, and acquire certain knowledge, which is the basis for your beliefs, but, believe it as you may, your philosophy will only be based on theory until the time you die. This philosophy could be very popular and shared by many, or it could be your own and put you in a rather difficult situation, because we all live in communities, and as prehistoric and barbaric as it may be in our technologically civilized world, we still do not enjoy minorities. If you are not with us, you're against us. And our philosophies, our beliefs are shaped and conditioned under a pressure of community. However, now we're entering a new era, the age of Aquarius or New Age. We are becoming more and more free in our beliefs, our understanding of the universe and our place in it is becoming more and more clear. Now we don't just blindly follow the church, we ask questions and we seek the truth. But there are downfalls. Freedom demands responsibilities, even if it is only to your own self. You realize that it is not enough to just be good, your obligation is to be good for something. You have to make your own decisions, and it's a lot more difficult than just follow. But what are you going to base your decisions on? Of course, there is a general theme in all of New Age thinking. But philosophies belong to a different dimension, and we live in a material, three-dimensional world. We can measure everything in our world from quantum particles to the weight of the sun. We can measure by time, velocity, weight, size, etc., etc., and we believe in what we can measure, what we can touch. Philosophies and theories are just that, they are our beliefs, and until we can find a way to measure them, they will remain unstable. Maybe, when we become closer in comprehension to what Einstein really meant, when he said that everything is an energy that vibrates on a specific frequency, maybe then we will be able to measure our philosophies and understand that thoughts are energy in motion, and they can be measured. Then theories and philosophies will become practical realities. But now we can easily sell out our beliefs for anything that has material substance. And who can blame you? After all, no one has came up with any substantial proof that, if you, for example, underpay your employee in this life, that in your next incarnation you, for certain, will become the one who is underpaid. Or if you slept with your best friend's wife, who said that the next time around the same will not happen to you? So, you play with your beliefs thinking that if you didn't get caught, you got away for good. And I am not here to judge. I am a student myself. Page 10. I know how difficult it is to realize that you are only dreaming, when you are actually dreaming, or make your philosophy an unbending rule of your life. For example, it hurts when you get punched in the nose. Now, this is an unbending rule. It always hurts, so it is not a theory anymore. The only way to test your knowledge of a higher law is to listen very, very carefully to that little voice inside. Somehow, you always know what's wrong and what's right. It's just that wrong doesn't hurt as much, and especially when no one else is watching. The reason that I'm telling you all this is very simple. I want you to see how I define beliefs and material, practical reality. I hope that you are satisfied that I do not confuse dimensions, and I also hope that our understanding on this issue is somewhat similar. My mother used to tell me that, when I was little, before I would make my next step, I would always feel the ground first, to avoid falling. And the step that I am about to take now is the most important step of my life. So, please understand that I am just being very cautious. To my knowledge, this is the only information that will shed some light on this fascinating issue. So, here I am, about 16 hours into an experiment. Initial reaction to cocaine anesthetic is completely gone. Your system has built up enough tolerance and you don't feel the same way as you did in the beginning. What happens now is that, because you are so used to side effects of visions and sounds, that they slowly disappear. Your conscience is as clear as it always is. As strange as it may sound, you are in complete control of all your faculties. You see, in the beginning, when you don't have any explanations in regards to those audiovisual effects, all you are doing is trying to fight them, but they persist, they confuse you, they try to sidetrack you, and for the longest time they succeed. This is where paranoia sets into a maximum. Especially, if you have something important to do, like go home, or you expect someone to come in, anything that's on your mind will amplify your fear. Your emotions will be magnified to its limits. Even when you are in a completely secured environment, as I was, you will see and hear things that you last want to see or hear. It's fascinating how it actually works. When I said that I've heard my mother's voice and knock on the door, I do not mean it as though it was imagined, or there were noises that I could have misinterpreted. No. It was absolutely real, and when you come to the door 15 to 20 to 100 times you learn to accept it. And when you accept it, it doesn't mean that it goes away, it continues for quite some time after that. Even having my assistant, that I trusted completely, did not help much. She was very patient with me, when I was accusing her of lying to me. The sounds were so real, to me, that I had no doubt that she let my mother in, even though it was against all logic. So, for about 10 hours and 2 to 3 grams of cocaine, my mind was totally sidetracked from the actual experiment. All my attention was devoted to figuring out what was outside of me, rather than concentrating on the inside. As I understand now, there is a perfect reason for that phenomena to exist, and the reason is, literally, out of this world. What I am going to reveal now had shaken my foundations. My understanding of spirituality completely changed. And, if before, I could only logically assume, after this revelation, it became knowledge. Three-dimensional, physical, practical, incredible knowledge. Page 11. After approximately 26 hours of continuous torture by garlic, absence of water or any kind of food, and especially complete lack of sleep, my physical condition slowly began to deteriorate. I was very thirsty and allowed myself a little sip of water. You have to understand that this whole exercise was my idea, maybe only stimulated by my friend, but I was the one who agreed to go for it. And, at this point, I was not about to give it up, even though, by now, it was beginning to be tiring and somewhat meaningless. After all, I had no idea of the outcome. And I always knew the dangers involved. I thought that I was more than halfway through, and to stop meant starting all over again, and I just could not face that prospect. Yes, I was determined to see it to the end. I filled the glass with cold water, My lady assistant was right there to see what is going to happen. After all, it was the first sip of water in 26 hours. I brought the glass to my lips and took a very small sip. The sensation was eerie. It was, as though something, from inside of my stomach, crawled up and swallowed that sip. My friend was standing there in disbelief, looking at me with that scared and at the same time, "I told you so," expression. She was frightened and excited at the same time. She said, "Did you see it?" Obviously, I didn't. I only had that sensation of something crawling up my throat and no taste of water. After it was apparently consumed, I put the glass down and walked to the mirror. All I was noticing that, on top of my forehead, there seemed to be quite a few of what looked like new black hair. You see, I began to turn gray when I was about 14 years old. It runs in the family. By the time I was 35 I had a full head of hair, but they were all gray, so the contrast was rather obvious. I told her about my discovery, but it was such a minor thing, compared to what she saw, that she said, "So what?" From the very beginning of all of that experimentation I was skeptical, to say the least. I mentioned before, that my friend was, somewhat, more on the other side, and I believe that she liked to exaggerate a little to stay popular, or to have something to talk about. So, now, even after what happened, I still did not believe in any of her stories. When it became apparent to her, that our relationship was not going anywhere, I had no feelings for her, other than friendship. She started saying, that there is something inside of me, that had control over my life. You know, how they say you have a monster inside of you, without meaning it literary. So my reaction was equally indifferent. Even when she was saying it in no uncertain terms. Who would believe in a story like that? Truthfully, I agreed to this experiment only, as bad as it sounds, to take advantage of the situation and at the same time to prove her wrong. That's all. Standing by the mirror, and examining myself, I could see no other apparent differences in my appearance aside from those new black hairs. However, I began taking longer breaks between those masochistic hits. On the next, such, break I went to my bedroom and sat down on a couch. Immediately I collapsed into a deep sleep. I was awakened by my own scream. Vision, that I had was so awful and terrifying, that I jumped out of bed screaming. As it happened, I was sleeping only, maybe, for a few seconds, because, as she told me, when I've left the living room she gave me a few seconds and went after me. Page 12. Never, in my life, I had such a horrifying nightmare. It was incredibly vivid, as though I was not sleeping and everything was happening to me, as it does, in real life. Huge bat flew straight at me and threw me onto the ground. Wings clapping with incredible force. Bat was circling around and around me, covering me with what looked like an umbilical cord. Sticky and strong, it was impossible to break through it, and it felt as though that cord was inside of me, under my skin. I was all wrapped up in it. The scariest part, however, was when I jumped out of bed, and was fully conscious. I had a feeling that I was plugged into an electrical outlet. All my insides were vibrating, as though I was holding live electric wires with my bare hands, and when my friend came in, she said that my skin was moving all over, expanding and contracting, stuff that you only see in horror movies. It took about 30 minutes until it finally, slowly came to rest. At this point I would like to remind you that my friend was not under influence of any kind of drugs or alcohol or any kind of medication. She was completely straight, and, whatever was happening to me she saw with her own eyes. This was where we had decided to get a camera. I was sorry that I didn't have it before. So, after about 1 hour, when my skin finally stopped crawling and my fear kind of subsided, I was scared out of my wits. My friend went to get a camera. She came back in about half an hour, and we had decided to continue with our incredible experiment. By this time, with all that I saw and felt, it wouldn't be too difficult to understand that I had second thoughts, but it was a two-way street. I could have stopped at any time and nothing in the world could have made me do what I did not want, and I had enough reasons not to want. However, by then, I began believing in what she was saying, namely that there is some kind of an animal inside of me, and she was saying also that together we could get rid of whatever it was. To explain exactly what was going on in my mind is impossible. I was torn between insanity and death. Even then I did not believe in some kind of possession by a devil. I was still hanging on by logic, and my logic was telling me that there indeed was something inside of me, but it was just, maybe, a worm, huge and scary, but a worm, a parasite. They exist and are recorded in medical journals. Sometimes they grow to incredible sizes. I've heard a story, a long time ago, about the woman, who was sick for a long time. Her husband was taking care of her, but it came to a point that she turned into almost a skeleton. She couldn't walk, talk or eat. Her husband could not take watching her sufferings anymore, and he had decided to put rat poisoning into her food to kill her, and with that to stop her suffering. As it happened, he had killed a worm that was eating her up from inside. The size of the worm was an unbelievable 60 feet. The woman had survived and became well. I, however, was not too sure about me. But at least this idea was more adaptable to my brain. Even though I thought that I was a spiritual person, I knew that I am a soul and a part of a greater energy that we call God. I knew about higher self, and every book on that subject was my favorite. I tried to live by ideals set out by New Age thinkers and believed in reincarnation. So, even though I loved all this, it never actually occurred to me that they were not just theories, but a reality. Page 13. So, the idea of a worm, as disgusting and ugly and scary as it may be, was easier for me to comprehend. And so, I went for it. Just like a man that jumps into an abyss because he doesn't see any other way out. If you could only understand what I was going through at this time, you'll see that I too didn't see any way out. The prospect of continuing living after what I and my friend had seen was just impossible. I had to get rid of whatever it was that lived inside of me. And at that time, I had no doubts that something huge and frightening, indeed, inhabited my body. With camera filled with film, and with a flashlight, in a slightly darkened living room, that had one draped window, and a big mirror, I lit up the matches, ready to inhale concentrated smoke from about a quarter gram of melting cocaine. My assistant was standing by my side, ready to take pictures of whatever may transpire. Smoke slowly filled my lungs. After about 20 seconds of continuous inhaling, I had just enough time to put out the matches, before I felt a weird sensation inside of my stomach. It was as though my skin had been sucked in. I could see a little suction cups, about 1 inch in diameter, and there were about 7 or 8 of them, right across my stomach. It felt to me as an octopus that was being pushed down against its will, and tried to grab onto the skin from inside of me. At this precise moment, camera's flashlight went off. I thought to myself that my friend was taking pictures of what was happening, but to my disappointment, she said that it went off by itself. I could see from the mirror that those cups were highly visible to me and to my friend. They looked like 1-inch round circles that were turning darker in color, almost purple, compared to the rest of my skin. What can I say? Cocaine did not do much, as far as mental anesthesia is concerned. It did not dull my fear. I was scared stiff. I was beginning to feel, as strange as it may sound, furious. My body, after all, was invaded without any doubts by an unknown animal. I was pushing it down with my hands. I could not only see, but also feel this creature. It was distinctly separate from the rest of my body and very much alive. I could even feel its heartbeat. It was different from my own, more rapid. The main bulk of its body was in my stomach, with its tentacles, with suction cups on them, all around me. I would estimate it weighed about 7 to 9 pounds, which formed a bulge at the bottom of my stomach, that I could feel with my hands. This is when the most amazing thing happened to me. My mind was split into 3 distinctly different personalities. You are going to have to bear with me on this. To describe something that is not of this world, with words that are of this world, is extremely difficult. I'm trying my best and you can help me with your imagination. But let me tell you, no matter how wild your imagination is, it will not be able to grasp what transpired. Tears started rolling down my cheeks. I was crying like a little boy. For the first time in my life I felt free. I'm at a loss for words. What I have experienced could only be compared to those who had near-death experiences and described the feelings of being in possession of all knowledge, or complete clarity, or coming home to the source. Page 14. All at once everything became clear to me. It was like, for the first time in my life, I could hear myself, hear my real, unobstructed self. There was absolutely no confusion. It was total and absolute happiness. I cried from being indescribably happy. I was free. I don't know exactly how long it lasted, maybe few minutes, but in those few minutes I understood everything there is to understand. It felt like universal truth was transmitted to me from the source that was not within my immediate self, but from about 1 meter above and a meter to the right from me. It was my higher self, or soul, or spirit, whatever is the human term, speaking directly to me. It was not saying anything in words, it was just revealing everything to me. At that moment I understood, or to be more precise, I knew that, what we call our body, is a biochemical machine, ingenious, but just a puppet, and I needed it, I needed it, for the purpose of going through this material, 3-dimensional experience. What was even more miraculous, if it is possible, was that at the same time I began receiving information from, what I later understood, was a negative entity. Words were coming loud and clear. It was saying that, yes, it was living inside of me since I was about 3 years old. It told me, that it understands that it made me suffer and now was the time for it to depart. And there was a prize for me for carrying it for so long, and that prize was that all of my channels would be open, and I knew exactly what it meant. Words were forming in my head, and it spoke. There were no uncertainties. It sounded like inside of my head, there was a radio tuned to a clear station. So schematically you could picture this as an interplay of 3 distinctly different entities. Higher self, lower self, and a neutral self. What I understand now is that, when there is no external stimulant, or when we are living in everyday life, we are, in reality, an integration of 3, each and every one of us are exactly the same, as far as the general construction is concerned. There are, however, exceptions, we call them saints. And it could be accomplished by exorcising negative entity out of the body. It is done through years of dedication, usually under strict supervision of a teacher and with continuous practice of meditation and very strict diet. Ideal, or maybe the only possible location for those who are interested, will be somewhere outside of civilized world. It is impossible to succeed by living in and dealing with everyday problems of material society. However, and this is a reason for me in revealing this, if this information will find its way into the minds of right individuals, situation could be very much different. I don't want you to understand me wrong. I am not trying to play God, and I don't want followers or publicity. This is hardly something for what you want to become known. As I said earlier, I am a very old-fashioned and private person, but there are cases where it might prove positive, and in any way you look at it, wouldn't you agree that it, at least, warrants some further investigation? Building another $400 million stadium will not solve any worldwide problems. However, this, just might, and there is comparatively no cost involved. All that is needed is a secure environment. Now, let's go back to an experiment. I was so overwhelmed by the information I received and by emotions, that I completely forgot about the camera. My friend was just staring at me. At that moment I knew that she understood what was happening. Everything that she felt or knew instinctively and tried so hard to explain to me for the longest time since she had mentioned to me that there was an animal inside of my body, has now proved to be right. I've tried to explain to her what was going on, but she just said I know. Page 15. At that moment I realized how ignorant I was all this time, but, at the same time, I also knew that there was no way in the world that I, or anyone else, could comprehend the magnitude of what was happening by simply listening to somebody's story. I perfectly understand that no one will ever be able to come to a realization of what I am talking about. So, I wouldn't even try to explain my inner feelings anymore. However, what was happening on the outside of me was as revealing. Once I understood what I really dealt with, my only purpose was to rid myself of this negative entity. And so, in about half an hour, recharged with new hope and understanding, I went for it again, with more drive than ever. One of my fears was that it might start to come out from my mouth. So I made sure that there will be enough garlic. Oh, I had no doubt, by then, that this negative entity was weakened by it. It hated garlic. If I would not close my mouth immediately after swallowing it, it seemed to just pop right out from my throat straight to the ceiling. I had to, really, force it down, and so I did. I took as much smoke as I could down my lungs and into my stomach. Without a second of hesitation I practically blocked my throat with garlic and plunged 2 pieces of it up my nose. Please don't laugh, I definitely was not laughing. I closed my mouth and pushed smoke down with all my might. My God, it then occurred to me, this is going to be just like giving birth, and at this precise moment I felt contractions. Unbelievable. And if I could come up with some other comparison, believe me I would have. But, even though I've never been a woman before, not to mention a pregnant woman, this is, probably, as close to it as it can possibly be. I felt the movement in the lower part of my stomach. It was somewhat spasmodic. The feeling that I had was that my body, noticing an alien presence, tried to reject it by pushing it out. Contractions were involuntary. Ridiculous, isn't it? In my embarrassment and total loss at what to do, I yelled to my friend that I am going into labor, and that she had better fill up a bathtub, or else. So she did. Without delay I went to the bathroom and got into the bathtub that was half full by now. As soon as I got into the bathtub I started pushing my guts out, literally. Now the scene is going to become somewhat graphic, but I have no choice. Everything must be told exactly as it was. So, I have to sacrifice my inhibition. After all, when a woman is giving birth, it is not a pretty sight either, but result is miraculous and it's well worth the effort. And, so it was in my case as well. Result is the issue here, and I believe it will prove to be as, if not more, miraculous than a child's birth. I was laying in a half-full bathtub with warm water. It felt as if I began hemorrhaging. Something was coming out through my rectum and I thought it was my intestines. I grabbed a mirror from the cabinet to examine what it was. What I saw was a round, cone-like tail, kind of pinkish in color, and it also had darker, circular stripes. I did not feel any pain or unease. As a matter of fact, it felt like it was not connected to my body by a nerve system or a tissue. It came out about 3 inches, moved around, very slowly, and then went back inside of me. Altogether it maybe took a minute or 2, but I took a very good look at it. I started pushing again and what appeared was unimaginable. At first I saw a swelling, like a little bump, right next to the opening. It then disappeared and reappeared on another side. This bump looked a little darker through my skin, almost bluish. Page 16. I could only describe it as if something, in a form of a snake, was trying to find a way out of my body, but because it was, maybe, blind and could not see the opening, was bumping its head around it. I was really speaking to God by then. All my faith and beliefs were brought to a point of culmination. I was alone in it. My friend could not do anything and I wouldn't let her into the bathroom. I could not call an ambulance for obvious reasons. Even now, when I am writing it, after 8 years since that experiment, I still am not able to find anybody to even talk about it, never mind helping me deal with it. I was on my own. So finally, after about 2-3 minutes of observing those bumps, my worst fear was realized. What came out was, indeed, a snake. A black snake. It was absolutely black and slippery, just like a sea eel, without eyes. It had a mouth, though. It came out about 5 inches in length and was about an inch in diameter. Mouth was clearly visible and, what was even more astounding was, that when it was opening up, what seemed to be a spark of electricity was igniting inside of it. I don't think I have to tell you that I was scared stiff. All I could do was watch and scream inside. I could not move or open my mouth. I was totally numb. The snake was moving in all directions, kind of getting the feel around. It was now protruding about 6-7 inches long and it touched my leg. When that happened I summoned all of my strength and screamed. The door to the bathroom popped open and a wave of cool air rushed inside. Just as I felt cool air on my skin, the snake with, what seemed to be a lightning speed went inside of my body. I jumped out of the bathtub, put on a robe and ran to living room. Standing in front of the mirror I, all of a sudden, felt completely cataleptic. I had absolutely no control over any of my muscles. I stood there, with my arms stretched to the sides. I felt very distinctly that this snake was making its way down my leg and into my foot. I know that this may sound crazy. How could it move from stomach to my foot without tearing a tissue? I felt, actually, that the tissue was being torn, but there was no pain or blood, just pressure. My friend was standing by my side, also speechless and as white as a ghost. But she saw what I was looking at. It looked like a vein under my skin, but a lot thicker and it was moving. Not only that, but, when it went down my foot, you could also see clearly its head with the mouth. Neither I nor my friend could believe our eyes. What was happening was incomprehensible. This creature was moving inside my leg for about 1 hour. All that time I could not move my hands or legs. All that I could do was watch it move. Finally, my friend remembered the camera. To be honest, I have to say, that I did not forget about the camera. This was very strange, because every time I would remember about taking some pictures of this phenomenon I would get scared out of my wits, so I tried not to remember. It's weird, almost an uninterpretable feeling and, as I have learned later, my friend was experiencing the same sensation. Believe me, I am sorry now, those pictures would have been one hell of a sight, literally, but I could not overpower my fear. Page 17. So finally, when the snake's movements began to come to a rest, my friend found enough strength to start taking some pictures. With all that was happening to me inside in my mind and out in the material, visible world, all that I could think of was that, it must be the devil himself, but, as scared as I was, at the same time I was fascinated by the inner workings of my mind. I could not exactly explain it, but you could imagine an instrument, be it musical or technological, with a control panel. Every time a musician or a computer operator would press a button, corresponding reaction would follow. I felt as if I had a control panel inside my head. For instance, when I thought of taking some pictures, I would feel fear, but the reaction was somehow delayed a few seconds. So from the initial thought to the actual feeling of fear, there was a little pause or hesitation, and that pause enabled me to witness the workings of this miraculous machine, the brain. It helped me put a few things into perspective. For example, when you hurt your finger you immediately feel pain, but in my case I would first see that the finger was hurt, then I would realize that there must be pain, something would click in my head, and only then I would feel pain. I even played with that effect for a little while. I would think of a camera, there would be a pause, then I would feel fear, then I'd sidetrack myself, concentrating on something else. After a while, when the fear would subside, I would go back thinking of the camera, and again, almost physically, I would sense that something would click inside my head, and I would feel fear again. Somehow, artificial fear, programmed fear, not real or natural, but, nevertheless, it would mechanically paralyze my actions. So I could not take pictures or even voice my wish out loud. Incredibly, it felt as being inside of a biological computer, seeing it at work. I am trying to explain it, as vividly as I can, but, of course, words will not do justice. Let's go back to the camera now. After about an hour of this mental interplay, I felt comfortable taking a few pictures. Fear, more or less, was brought under control. I thought that, by now, nothing else would surprise me. I thought that I have seen everything there is to see and more, but the show, as it happened, was far from over. Snake, by then, was laying still in my right foot. It was beginning to almost disappear, or kind of blend in with the rest of my skin. All I could see was that the skin was a little more red where Snake was supposed to be. I only felt, almost subliminal movement on the surface of my body, and I did not pay attention to places where I felt this movement. However, when I began closer examination of these places of subliminal movement, almost like goosebumps, but even gentler, I noticed certain repetition, regularity of some sort. Skin would raise up a little, making a straight line, then curve, then make a circle, become a bit darker or lighter, and then, shockingly, I realized that they were not just lines. They were pictures. It was like something or someone was drawing pictures from inside of me, on my skin, and they were not just pictures, they were faces, devilish faces and words. I could not understand what they meant, but everything was so highly visible, I knew that it was not my imagination, simply because my friend could see it all too. And when a week later I got my pictures back from the Photoshop, I was completely relieved to see that there was no hallucinations and everything came out beautifully. I could see words, separate letters, and, most of all, I could see the devil's face. Page 18. I was only sorry that I did not have a video camera or a professional photographer, because that face was animated, lips were moving, as though trying to say something, eyes were opening and closing, blinking. This is, probably, too fantastic for you to comprehend, and I don't blame you a bit. This was straight out of a horror movie with a lot of special effects, and if I would have listened to this myself, I would probably have thought that it is all science fiction or a plot of someone's sick imagination. And, if I wouldn't have those pictures now, I too, most likely, would have thought that I imagined it all. But it was all real and I have pictures to prove it. What I would like to do now, is to make a little deal with you. I would like to ask you, to suspend your skepticism, only temporarily. Think of everything I have said above as a proven fact. I know it won't be easy, for you. I, on the other hand, was a different story. I've lived through it and have no doubt, whatsoever. So let's try to examine the possibilities. What if it really is true? What do we gain out of this knowledge? How would it affect the natural development of human race on planet Earth? Doesn't that boggle your mind? Can you imagine life without negative feelings, hate, jealousy, fear, misery, etc., etc., even confusion? No more. This is hard to embrace. I felt it once in my life and I understood that it is indeed possible. We have lived with negative for thousands of years. There were only a few exceptions. We called them holy men and they were our teachers. Their words traveled throughout millennium, unaltered. At the basis of their teachings were one constant: they, most of all, wanted to teach us love. But how can you love unconditionally and without exceptions with all the negative force constantly present? We get so used to it that, as you see right now, we can't even imagine otherwise. It became an inseparable part of all of the human race. Well, let me tell you something, If my tiny voice is going to be heard in this gigantic desert of the deaf, you might have an opportunity to experience for yourself this feeling of indescribable love. If anybody tried or will ever try to describe that feeling in words, I am sure they will fail. This is something that has to be experienced, to be understood. The amazing part about it is that, under close examination, everything makes sense. There is nothing illogical and it does not contradict natural law. It's just that, there are certain laws that have not been discovered yet by contemporary science. Well, maybe I should not say that, because the law behind this phenomenon was actually discovered. It's just it was never revealed. You see, it takes a special kind of scientist with a special kind of brain to, not only comprehend, but explain physically and mathematically. I am talking about Dr. Albert Einstein and his unified field theory, in which he explained that everything we see in our three-dimensional, material world, including ourselves, is an energy that vibrates on a specific frequency. It started off as an accident, the usual combination, an accident and a presence of a brilliant mind of a scientist capable of abstract thinking. In 1937 Dr. Albert Einstein was assigned by the U.S. Navy intelligence to find a way for making ships invisible to the enemy. Page 19. He started off with the idea of a vapor, thinking that, by the use of the heaters, water will evaporate around the ship and, by so doing will provide camouflage, but the attempt was disappointing. A cloud in the middle of the ocean is a strange phenomenon and, no doubt will attract attention of the enemy force, and, so, it was abandoned. Dr. Einstein's next idea was to create an electromagnetic field around the ship which will manipulate air molecules. That was all he wanted to accomplish, but what happened in reality was a catastrophe, that led to, what could be rightfully termed, the discovery of the 20th century. It has now become known as Philadelphia experiment. There are many different qualities and characteristics of vibrations. Depending on the source of energy, some could be easier detectable than others. For example, musical instruments give out vibrations that resonate our ear membranes and brain interprets them as sound, that is easily recognizable. However, energy that produced by quartz crystals, piezoelectricity, give out vibrations that are only detectable by fine-tuned instruments. Our ear is not designed to notice such vibrations, probably because our limited biological computer, brain, needs to be protected from overload of information, and there may be other reasons. There is even finer energy, that is only now beginning to be recognized by science. Instruments, to my knowledge, have not been designed yet, and this is the energy generated by our brain and is given out in a manner of a thought. So, each thought has its own frequency of vibration, depending on the quality and intensity of intent. There are, also, those vibrations, that are translated by our brain as colors, some of them, however, not detectable through normal vision, ultraviolet or infrared, for instance, beyond the range of our sensory perception. To put everything into perspective, we could separate all vibrations into three basic categories. First, detectable by human, audio-visual equipment. Second, detectable, only through specially designed instruments. Third, yet, undetectable by any known technique. Also, all vibrations carry their own qualities. There are those that resonate with our own energy field and produce pleasurable emotions, and those that are dissonant, which are making us feel uncomfortable or even ill. Examples may be music or colors, combination of which could heal or destroy. For instance, it was scientifically measured that the music of Mozart promotes growths, color blue produces calming effect, while green is healing. That is why in most hospitals you will find walls painted in those colors. So it will be correct to say that human biological vehicle is an energy field that, vibrating on a specific frequency, will attract similar frequencies and repel others. Every frequency of vibration has its certain quality. One of these qualities are emotions. For example, when we hate, We generate frequencies that are low, compared to emotion of love, when frequency of vibration is high. Energy field, that we call God, is a source of all existing vibrations and their qualities, be it negative or positive. Everything is, of God. If we establish the fact that, we are an energy field, with certain frequencies and qualities of vibrations, then, our higher self, or a soul, vibrates on a higher frequency, while lower self, vibrates on a lower frequency. Energy fields, that are representatives of Flora Kingdom, possess their own frequencies of vibration and qualities.